that we hold this relic for future generations so that Americans 100 years from now understand the significance of this object. It's a very happy flag right now in its new chamber.
Today they make flags out of nylon, but the Star-Spangled Banner is made of cotton and wool gauze. Family Heirloom Weavers in Red Line, Pennsylvania is Hollywood's go-to for authentic-looking historic fabrics. These machines can create a nearly exact replica of the Star-Spangled Banner fabric.
That flag was 30 feet high and 40 or 45 feet long, and if that would have been out of real heavy fabric, it wouldn't have unfurled, it would have just hung there.
Ironically, the fabric probably came from England. It may have been stolen by privateers or smuggled past the British Navy by blockade runners. On September 12, 1814, British ships of war approached the port of Baltimore.
In the entire Royal Navy, there were 8 bomb ships. 5 of them were sitting there in the Patapsco River. These are the most powerful siege artillery afloat.
They were not supposed to get that far. Shoals of mud should have grounded the heavy vessels.
But the British are magnificent sailors and managed to get the ships up anyway, which a lot of folks in Baltimore had not thought would be possible.
On board one of these British warships, an American, Francis Scott Key.
Talk about a witness to history. He finds himself in Baltimore Harbor just prior to this battle.
A respected attorney, Key is there to negotiate the release of a client, Dr. William Beans. Beans was arrested for capturing British soldiers after the Battle of Bladensburg.
He was deemed an enemy of the British state, and he was in captivity aboard one of the British ships.
Key brings evidence that convinces British commander Robert Ross to set Beans free. But they're not allowed to leave.
British commander said, "Oh no, you and your friend Dr. Beans are now hostages because both of you know our target. As soon as we've captured Baltimore, you will be released."
The British strategy is two-pronged. First, Commander Ross lands a battalion of 4,000 north of the city. The Americans inflict heavy damage to the British front lines, but are overtaken. The next day, on the river, guns begin to sound for the naval assault on Baltimore. Fort McHenry is armed with 56 French naval guns. They have a maximum range of 1.5 miles. But they are no match for British mortars that can fire with accuracy from 2 miles away.
The British could sit from 2 miles out and lob shells at the fort all day long.
Safely out of range, British ships pound the fort with fire.
There's no cover, and they've got this cascade of these terrible, terrible whining shells landing in and around the fort.
Key's ship is in the thick of it. He has a front row seat.
He's in this unique position, actually, with the British ships, watching the outcome. It's hard for me to imagine what it would have been like to be on that ship, essentially surrounded by the British sailors and the British Navy.
It was so accidental. He was simply doing his job and found himself witness to a battle.
From the start, it seemed like a losing battle.
It looks like it's only going to be a matter of time before the fort has to surrender.
Fort McHenry survives 6 hours of continuous shelling. But inside its walls lies a weak link that could destroy the entire fort. stands between the British and the annihilation of Baltimore. If the city falls, America itself may be next. But inside Fort McHenry, a deadly weakness. Hundreds of barrels of unprotected black powder.
The Achilles heel of Fort McHenry was indeed its powder magazine. This powder magazine had been built decades earlier, and it was a brick vault, and it had not been properly covered with a huge pile of earth.
30,000 pounds of gunpowder. Twice the demolition power of this quarry blast. If the poorly shielded magazine were to explode, the fort would crumble and Baltimore would be lost. Then, a direct hit. The fort's commander, George Armistead, can only wait for the inevitable.
But miraculously, this shell does not explode. He's very lucky. The garrison and the fort likely would have been decimated.
Armistead realized he had a real serious issue at hand.
Armistead's soldiers quickly moved the barrels to relative safety under the fort's rear walls. The British don't know how close they came to victory.
So many of their shells are going long or short or not exploding at all. Admiral Coburn complains that they're as useless as tossing biscuits at a wall.
They move closer. As they sail within a mile and a half of the fort, American artillery take advantage of the closer range. A massive roar shakes the harbor. McHenry's cannons are effective at last. The British ship Devastation suffers a direct hit. 5 more shells strike the artillery ship Volcano. Forced back, the British Navy redoubles the barrage. The concrete rocket's red glare lights up the skies over the harbor.
It was like a fireworks display. People who watched it were enthralled. They were terrified of the noise, absolutely terrified. But they saw a kind of beauty in it.
The heavy fire goes on and on. Aboard an enemy attack ship, Francis Scott Key fears the worst.
He knows that the level of hatred that's directed at the city would probably mean death and destruction of the town.
The barrage from the water is constant, and with British infantry marching on the city's borders, Key knows Baltimore's fate looks grim.
He paced the deck of his ship in the darkness, hoping the explosions would continue, because if they didn't, he knew that the fort had capitulated.
The siege lasts all night. As dawn nears, there is a sudden silence.
He is utterly terrified and concerned that he's going to see the British flag flying over the fort.
There was this moment where he really thought the outcome of the future of the country was in jeopardy. Would the American nation, would the United States survive?
It takes great. Francis Scott Key watches the British bombardment of Baltimore's Fort McHenry. If it should fall, it opens a gateway to America's defeat. After 25 hours, an ominous silence.
Key was on board the ship wondering and asking himself what flag would be raised over the fort.
he made out the stars and stripes flying above the fort.
The American experiment, the American nation, for that moment, was surviving.
Mary Pickersgill's masterpiece unfurls over the fort.
Never before had he looked with such reverence upon the symbol of his country. Never before had the flag had such sheen to its glory.
It was the glory of victory. The wool catches the wind. The stars and stripes wave in the face of the enemy. The British are convinced the fort cannot be breached. Baltimore has been saved. On board a retreating warship, Key is struck with what he later called an inspiration not to be resisted.
He wrote down everything that tumbled through his mind while the intensity of the moment lasted.
The experience had shaken him so to the core that he had no other outlet that would mean as much to him as to take out a piece of paper and to write on it.
Freed by the British and safe in a Baltimore hotel room, Key drafts 4 stanzas. The first relives the uncertain moments before dawn and the battle itself. Key calls it the defense of Fort McHenry. His original draft survives at the Maryland Historical Society.
It's just a very plain, simple piece of paper, not even any hotel letterhead on it. Key didn't even sign it. Very unpretentious, I think.
The poem is published and set to the melody of a popular song called To Anacreon in Heaven. The song was originally written for an exclusive gentlemen's drinking club in London. At an octave and a half, performances of the tune would have only been improved by alcohol.
It was a popular tune that a lot of people knew, and he realized it happened to fit relatively well rhythmically with the poem that he'd written.
Key's song told a story people wanted to hear. In today's language, it went viral.
Key's words, as they're spread around the country, created this indelible image. You know, not unlike what to picture the Marines raising the flag at Iwo Jima, or the firefighters putting the flag up at World Trade Center after the 9/11 attack. In an era where we didn't have photography, Key's words created this painting that everyone around the country was able to visualize.
He's putting the listener back in his place. This is what he was thinking and feeling at that moment. Does that Star-Spangled Banner yet wave? Question mark. What if the answer is yes, that flag does still wave? What does that mean for the country, the nation, and survival? But what if the answer is no? What does that mean for the nation?
There we go. And I want you to picture in your mind, when you're singing the word wave, I want you to picture this. When it waves in the wind, it is inspiring. It looks alive. It looks like a heart beating or a living thing when it waves, right? And the voice has vibrato and tone quality in it, coming right out of you. Wave is what you want to picture in your mind, and you want your audience, with the ringing of your voice, to feel a waving flag.
Sure.
Oh, say?
A surge of patriotic feeling follows the war. It's a breakout moment for the American flag.
What Key really started was the transformation of the flag from a military utilitarian symbol to something that embodied new definitions of American identity and ideals.
They have become this symbol that people are willing to fight and die for.
The song catches on and never lets go. It's played at a sporting event for the first time in 1918.
People were simply singing it so much that the government decided to make it the national anthem.
More than a century after Key wrote it, in 1931, Congress officially makes the Star-Spangled Banner the national anthem.
It was never commissioned, and it was done by an amateur. And I think, what can be more American than that?
Official status comes with a rule book. Hats off, hands over hearts. And in the military, a band must play it through to the end, no matter what. When Japanese planes first began bombing Pearl Harbor, Navy musicians were mid-song on the deck of the USS Arizona. As explosions burst around them and the battleship began to sink, the musicians played the national anthem to its end.
Star-Spangled Banner is about one battle, one specific point in time, one night, and that journey from fear to triumph.
If ever in your life as a singer, you have to communicate an idea, the national anthem is your time to do it.
And at the heart of that idea is the flag.
We exhibit as a nation when we're happy and full of pride for our accomplishments, like planting it on the moon. We've used it at times of great sorrow and loss, and we'll hold it up and we'll say, this flag represents my ideals and what I think.
Most people couldn't probably tell you what the flags of other countries look like, but almost everybody can tell you what the American flag looks like.
Francis Scott Key asked a question. 200 years later, we can still proudly answer yes. That Star-Spangled Banner yet waves.
Okay, we'll talk about this a little bit here and then we'll move on. Anything interesting that you guys picked up that kind of caught your thought process when we were watching this? Feel free to share. Anybody? Any contradictions to what I told you?
Did you say George Armistead or did you say John?
Okay, what do you have on your ID sheet?
John.
John. So, who is John Armistead? He was the slave that helped what? Yeah, I did mess it up. It is George, so you should correct that. You get Armistead on your brain. I was hoping somebody picked that up. And it's not John Armistead, because he's the one that helped who? The Battle of Yorktown become a successful endeavor for the American colonists. So it actually is George Armistead. Anybody else see anything else of concern or contradiction? One thing I noticed that was different from what I told you was that they said that they had accuracy at 2 miles with the cannons. Did you catch that? I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, because if you bomb somebody 6 hours with accuracy, it'd be done. You know what I mean? So that's a little bit debatable. Now, I wanted to kind of say this. I didn't say much about this, but what is the rocket's red glare really in the song? What is the rocket's red glare? What are they? No. No. What? Remember those rockets they said were basically pipe bombs on a stick? That they actually shot those to start fires, basically. The British ships were shooting those, I think they called them convolute rockets, off of the ships. And that was the rocket's red glare, then the bombs bursting in air with the cannon fire. Okay? So that was kind of interesting. And then how many of you knew, I bet some of you, most of you thought the national anthem, I mean, since he wrote the song, we had the national anthem. 1931 is when Congress actually made the Star Spangled Banner our national anthem. Now, before it was even made our national anthem, people were standing for ball games. So what did they say, 1918 was the first one? So anyway, I think it's very, very important. But you know, this our national anthem, the history of the flag, and when it began at its height, occurred because of the Battle of Baltimore at Fort McHenry. But I guess my goal here is that you kids, when you now participate in athletics or go to watch ball games and you hear the national anthem, you just don't take that for granted as, oh, that's just a song that we play, you know, because that's what we do. It actually has a meaning to it. And so you should have a little more to that. And if you ever perform it like some of you do, maybe it'll mean a little more for you also. So that's your Star Spangled Banner. With any luck at all, when we get to DC in a year, we'll get a chance to go to the American History Museum and see that. Sometimes you notice that thing comes out up like this and it goes down. Sometimes it's on display, sometimes it's not, because it's in real low oxygen area. And so I hope you caught this, because I think we watched this on the flag etiquette video, that the tattering of that flag in the museum isn't from the bombs bursting in air, the rockets' red glare, it's from people that took souvenirs. Now, can you imagine sewing a 42-foot by 30-foot flag? Can you imagine what that took for those people? Well, they say $400 and some she charged, but most was materials. That was a third of what her house was worth. Isn't that what they said? Yeah, interesting. Okay, we're going to move on then in our lecture to black soldiers and sailors. We're going to tell you a little bit about the African American